And I gave up so many times thinking like, I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to make it. But you can't give up. If this is what you want to do and this is what you want and this is the life you want for yourself, you can't give up. My name is Magdiela Duhamel. I'm the production manager for Nickelodeon's Emmy-nominated show, The Casagrandes.
I'm Carlo Padilla. I'm one of the production coordinators on The Casagrandes. I got my start in animation actually at Nickelodeon as an intern on a CG show called Shimmer and Shine. And that was kind of like my first entrance into animation where I learned a lot about production. Before, I was actually studying business, made a career pivot during school, realized that wasn't what I wanted to do, and thought I should give it a try to jump into animation, something that I was really passionate and something that before I had only really seen as a hobby.
I'm a local Angelino. I'm born in Mexico, but I was raised in Highland Park, California. I'm a local barrio kid. I didn't have money to go to school. That was definitely not something that I had an option to even think about, especially a career in arts like animation, like no way. Being from LA, I knew that I wanted to work in the industry. I just didn't know how. My parents were very supportive and they said, as long as you don't do acting, that's fine. So I started television production at Pasadena City College. I finished a program there. And once I was done, I knew I couldn't afford to transfer. I was an international student. I couldn't afford to go to Northridge. So I actually just started working right at a community college. I've done everything. Like I was in event planning. I did taco trucks. oh my God, I've done it all. Before coming to Nickelodeon, I was working at Marvel Studios for their first ever animated series, What If? I've been very lucky to have a lot of experience in animation. I worked for script supervisor, I've worked in film, I work in feature, animated, and live action, as well as musical performances. I always wanted to work in animation. I always thought that it was something that I couldn't do because I needed to be an artist. But when I was working in live action, I happened to work on Fox and FX. And at the time, I was working on Archer. And I realized, like, wait a minute, this is animated and I'm doing post. Like, I can do this for animated world. So I started applying everywhere that would take a post-production coordinator or post-production PA or anything post-production related in animation. And that's sort of how I got in.
Going into animation, like I come from a Mexican background. My parents are immigrants, and that's why my background was in business. I was kind of pressured into doing the big three: business, medicine, or law. And ultimately, like I was the oldest brother of three. There was a lot of pressure for me to like pick something that was safe and that I could ultimately validate my parents' hard work. So it was really tough for me to like make that jump into animation, but I was so thankful that I made that decision because I think I'm so much happier working with people like Magdiela and, being in those rooms and having impact on like other kids that, come from Latino backgrounds and they can see, themselves represented on the show. And there's like actually an authentic kind of response to it. So that's super rewarding for myself.
Someone like myself as a production manager, my job in a nutshell is make sure that we are staying on budget, make sure we stay on time, make sure we're hitting our delivery, hitting our milestone dates, and make sure that our team is happy. That's something really important to me, is making sure that you're working for a show that you're passionate about, but also that you're making strong relationships. And PAs and coordinators are directly under me. So one big thing that I'm really passionate about is helping them sort of what career paths they want to do.
Specifically on our show, we have two production teams that are structured of one coordinator and one assistant. One team covers the even numbered episodes and the other team does the odd numbered episodes. So we just kind of like slice everything in half. And what I do is I'm in the trenches day to day, making sure that all of the art, all of the deliverables that are being created on the show are going through the pipeline and going to the next step, being reviewed by our teams and making sure that everything's being approved and that all notes are being communicated across teams. So my day to day usually starts with a cup of coffee, and then I'll log in, check my emails, make sure there aren't any like urgent or pressing matters that need to be immediately attended to. But then I kind of just make sure that all the episodes that I'm tracking, because at any given time, we could be tracking 3 to 4 episodes and they're all at different stages. So I want to make sure that like episode 2 is in color right now. I got to make sure that all of these notes have been applied. So production is just a lot of scheduling and tracking and just pushing assets through to make sure that we're getting the best product out of our team.
And voila! It's under your nose!
while Carlos is dealing with the day-to-day, making sure that there's notes taken in every meeting, that the notes are being addressed on the next stage, and that our showrunners, our producers, our team leads are sort of informed of what's going on and moving it to the next stage. A production manager's job is to make sure that the creative's message, the creative's voice, color, everything is also being translated as it goes down the pipeline and isn't being diluted. And by that is the communication aspect. So I kind of see it as like I'm the middleman between every situation. So any change in the pipeline, if our art director wants to do something a little different and our director is okay with that, we just have to find out how to do it, right? It's like you can say one thing, I want this way, great, let's do it that way. Well, who has to do it? Someone like Carlo can help me come with a linear and very granular pipeline and steps daily. But overall, the big picture structure of the pipeline will be then created by myself and our production team. Like what works better for everyone.
Who are you people?
Marty, I'm scared.
Our job is to make sure that all of our leads, like our color supervisors, our art directors, our color stylists, our lead designers, all of our leads are not only working cohesively in the project, but that also the pipeline is working. And every time there's like some type of breaking the pipeline, maybe we realize we need an additional week in art because our artists, are falling behind and this episode is very complicated. That means we need to add a whole line to that episode, right? Maybe a whole week. So that's sort of kind of how the big picture goes. But as far as the day-to-day, as a production assistant or as a production coordinator like Carlo, you're doing the day-to-day and you're working in the room with the directors. I think that's one thing that people don't realize, that if you are a creative person, production is a great career because you are in the room. When I was a coordinator, many times there was stuff where, you build relationships with your directors and they'll ask you, like, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And it's really cool to see some of the ideas that I'm like, well, maybe we should do this. And like, that's great. Let's put it on screen. That's really cool to be in those rooms to kind of have that. Because remember, if you want to be a producer, production is sort of where you want to be because you're producing a show. Carlo is producing a show. We're producing a show. You might not have that title now, but you're doing all the little granular work to get there. So when it's your time to put together a show on your own for yourself, you know what to do.
When you're in the room, it's kind of a skill that you really have to build. It's a soft skill, like being able to read like personalities and different people and different communication styles. So when you're in the room and notes are being given, you want to make sure that you're being attentive, that you're being diligent and writing the note verbatim exactly how it came out and not kind of translating it in your own way, because those notes have to be implemented and they have to be specifically following who gave that note. So you want to make sure that you're writing things down verbatim, quickly, because a lot of notes are being given. Sometimes even in production, we're not really part of the like creative executive decisions, but sometimes, hey, I have a Mexican background. And if there's a question about something that's like, about food or culture, they might actually ask me like, hey, what do you think about this? Is this something that actually happens? So being part of the room is great because I can give my feedback, even though I'm not a producer, I'm not an artist or a manager, but I can still give my input into the show, even at the coordinator level. And those are the kind of impacts that, we'll see like later down the road, like, hey, that design, that has a note that I actually implemented. So seeing that actually be created and put out into the world is like really satisfying and fulfilling, even for a production coordinator.
Don't be afraid if you are willing to start over in your career and you are like, I want to do this. Don't be afraid of those production assistant job titles. That's one big thing that I want to make sure, even if you're an artist out there. Nickelodeon is huge on like helping build people within. Their internship program is great. Their artist program, their writing program, all those programs are amazing. And Nick is huge on investing on those who are working hard. And that includes on our end as PMs. If I have a PA who wants to be an artist, which is actually a case on our show right now. We have a amazing, talented production assistant who wants to be an artist, and we have that in mind. So whenever there's an opportunity for her to do some artwork, freelance, paid as far like the right rate as far as the union base, like all that, that's a side thing we can offer. And she's a PA, and our goal is that whenever we have that position available, she can then take that and then we can bring a new PA. Because PAs, you have to understand that in animation, a production assistant is very different than live action. A live action PA, yes, you're going to be getting coffee, you're going to be doing like pretty much anything that comes up. With production assistants in animation, you're working in production. So you're not necessarily like getting the coffee and stuff. You're doing so much more. Your person that you're sort of directly helping is your coordinator, someone like Carlo in this case. So you are doing breakdowns. You're learning about story. You're learning about voice recording. You're learning about a little bit about everything. And that's so important because even as an artist, it's so crucial for you to know your place in the pipeline and the domino effect that you have and how one department can hand off to another. I feel a lot of times in productions, we kind of do our job and then the next person can deal with it. And there's like a bridge, there's a middle ground where you have to communicate with the next department to hand it off properly. And I think you learn a lot of that when you're a PA. And then when you turn, I can tell when there's artists that come from production because they understand the value of naming their files correctly. They understand the value of meeting deadlines. They understand the value and the big impact they have when they don't turn off layers or follow those little quick things that, we then have to do. So if you see PA jobs for animation, especially if you want to be a director, if you want to be a storyboard artist, revisionist, go to story, start your production story.
Maybe your goal later down the road is to be an artist or a writer. Having that background in production is super important because it just makes you a stronger candidate for whatever role you're trying to be. So you have that background knowledge of like what the pipeline is, what's happening before my part, and what's happening after my part when I'm done and I'm moving it along to the next person. So highly recommend for anybody who's just like trying to figure out too, because that's where I was at when I started in animation. I wasn't really sure. I didn't know anyone in the animation industry. So doing the Nickelodeon internship really opened up my eyes and I got to see the plethora of like different careers and job roles that like I had no idea existed. I thought that only artists worked at studios, but I was so wrong. There are so many roles, so many different disciplines. Maybe you can decide like, hey, I see what this animatic editor is doing and I'm really curious about it. I want to learn more about that. So there's all these different like paths that you can take really. And you can do all of those, starting in production. So those executive assistant roles and production assistant roles are a really great place to start.
I'm ready, oh yeah!
Something that I really look for when I'm like reviewing a resume for like a potential, opportunity on my show or other shows is I'm looking for someone who's been able to troubleshoot and the role that they have, someone who has experience putting out fires and can systematically approach a challenge and kind of figure out how to best find a solution to it. And then another thing that I look for is like adaptability, someone who can like wear many hats.
I'm Shu. Doc's my brother.
But we just saw you. You're even wearing the same clothes. The only difference is your hat.
Doc works on the docks. That's why they call him Doc. And I work in the shop. That's why they call me Shu.
I see that a lot of people feel like they might be too overqualified to be a PA, or they feel like maybe they've done too much work and now they might not be hired. That's also not true. I think that there's many people like me who don't come from that background or come from, like I was an event planner for many years and weddings and stuff. So to me, when I'm looking at resumes, I look at all the transferable roles that you had and how they apply. And that means like if you worked at a grocery store, dealing with people, that's a big thing. If you worked in retail, that's a big thing. There are ways, especially if you're starting to, be a PA. Don't be afraid of that. Apply. Don't be afraid, especially women out there. And this is something I relate. I'm sure men too, but women out there, you see a position and there's 10 things and you can only do 4 and then you don't apply because you're terrified, right? And you're like, I don't know if I can do this. Men will go and see 3 things they can do and they'll apply. So we have to use that rule as well. And that's something that I kind of like tell people is like, if you don't think you can do this job because there's 5, 7, 8 things, Google it. Go online and find out what these words mean. Find out what they do. You have a community around you, your friends who are artists, your friends who are in production, social media, like ask those questions. The other thing that I look at is a little bit of personality. If you're applying for an animation, a creative role, I do look for a little bit of personality because you're working in cartoons, you're making content for kids. That's what I look for personally right away. And then the last thing I look at is notes. How are you with notes? That's the best advice I can give you now. And this is for always. If you work in animation, you're either going to be taking notes, reading notes, giving notes, or trying to translate notes. Learn how to take notes because you're always, even when you become a director, producer, showrunner, you're going to be giving notes.
I'm doing it! I'm doing it! Yeah! Yeah! Some of these, and some of them. Done. Now let's see how it looks so far. The
And then the last thing that I look for is presence. You have to be able to run a room. I don't think people realize the pressure and the responsibility that PAs and coordinators have in the session. I'm not in all the sessions. So if a director is not agreeing with another director and they have to make a decision and I'm out there to be like, okay guys, like what do we want? And being like the ref, then guess what? Carlo has to do it because that's his job. So you have to be able to run the room in a way of like, okay, this is what you think. So we think, well, what if we do this? Or what do you guys think about this? And sort of that is the biggest thing. And if you're someone who's going to come into an interview with a very like meek introvert personality, that's going to be a little hard because we need someone to be like, okay, guys, we're out of time. Or, okay, guys, we have 10 minutes. We got to go. So if you can't show me that you can handle a room or handle those personalities, it's really hard. So those are the things that I personally look for.
My biggest no, especially during an interview, is maybe like the first or second round will be a lot of like behavioral questions. And sometimes the question will come up like, what's like your biggest weakness? And that's like an interview question everyone dreads being asked, right? But this is a chance where you can really be introspective and show the hiring managers that you're able to like analyze yourself, more importantly, and that also you can give a good example of how you're tackling that weakness, right? So an example for me was I'm really bad at like organizing paperwork. So like in production, you're handling schedules and all of these like different pieces of paper. And like I was terrible at like organizing them in an efficient way. So that was an example that I would use in interviews and I would tell them about how I'm improving.
If you're an artist and you want to be an artist, don't lie about it. Just be honest in your interview and just kind of be like, oh, I'm more into production, but I love to be an artist. I like to know those things ahead of time. It doesn't mean that it's going to push you towards or not to a job. It just means that when we hire someone, we need to know, okay, you have to commit at least a year in this position before you can be an artist role. And then the other thing would be, if there's something you don't know, especially as a PA, it's your chance to say you don't know. Be honest, don't lie.
Overall, don't be discouraged. It's really hard to break into animation. I don't think it was easy for any one of us to make the jump. So just keep trying. I would really encourage everyone to seek support, seek mentors, look for people that are in the industry and are willing to help out and reach out to people. There's lots of wonderful organizations that help doing that, like Latinx in animation and Women in Animation. There's so many wonderful organizations that if you're really interested in breaking in, those are like really good resources for anyone interested. So yeah, just keep going, find friends that are also passionate about animation, and yeah, just keep trying, never give up.
Animation is a beautiful industry because we tell stories that are literally shaping the next generation of adults because we're influencing the kids now. And I think that's great. And looking at children in a way as they're equal to us and not talk down on them, that's important. So my big advice is never stop learning. Never stop being curious, especially if you're in animation, learn about animation. One of the greatest things that I heard from Jorge Gutierrez was when he was at CalArts, he knew he wasn't that good. He saw talent and was like, these people are way better than me. So what did he do? He literally was working twice as hard. If they had one assignment for one thing due, he did 3 and then chose the best one out of those. So I know it sucks and I know it's hard, but if this is what you want, you're gonna have to work really hard and you can't give up.